It's finally here. After several failures and a few scandals, 2017 closed with Donald Trump and the Republican Party's first major political victory since the presidential elections that landed the well-known casino and property development magnate in the Oval Office. We are, of course, talking about the tax reform that, after being approved by Congress, was signed by President Trump on December the 22nd, 2017.
$3.2 trillion in tax cuts for American families, including the doubling of the standard deduction and the doubling of the child tax credit.
This is, as I'm sure you've heard, the largest tax reform in 30 years. The impact and the controversy have been massive, and that's appropriate for the importance of this political event. For its supporters, the tax reform is a real revolution, and many qualify it as the biggest tax reduction in the history of the United States.
This is good for American business, it's good for the American economy, and it's good for the American people.
For its detractors, however, the reform is poorly developed and lies far from the promises that the president made during his electoral campaign.
Tax the poorest people, okay? Under 35,000 will be taxed the most. Under 75,000 will be the second highest tax, and the billionaires and the millionaires get a tax cut. What's wrong with this picture?
So I think the questions to be asked here are very clear. We have to ask what's true in all of this, what's it really all about, and is it as large as people are saying? And ultimately, what can everyone expect from this? Well, let's have a look. In this video, we'll explore the positive and also the not-so-positive aspects of a reform that, as its first consequence, has managed to calm the waters in the Republican Party and, in a way, reconcile Donald Trump with the party leaders of both chambers of Congress. And given how things were going after a year of taunts, attacks, and mistrust, this is really worth acknowledging. Check out what the media said just a few short months ago.
The president has been very focused, of course, on, his Twitter account. He fired off another Twitter storm yesterday about his frustrations with party leaders Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. With all the infighting, though, in the GOP, do Democrats have a political advantage now?
But before we go on, what can we expect? Let's see what this law, a tax reduction within the United States, really means. Well, the first question we need to answer is, how much does it really actually reduce taxes? Is this really the biggest tax drop in US history? Now, Donald Trump certainly has his take.
Today, it was my great honor to sign the largest tax cuts and reform in the history of our country.
So, according to the president and also many Republican Party politicians, Americans are facing a great fiscal revolution. A revolution that could make even Ronald Reagan's tax cuts look pretty tiny.
This is the biggest tax cuts and reform in the history of our country. This is bigger than actually President Reagan's.
However, dear viewer, before you launch your celebration, please do wait a minute, because we already know that Donald isn't particularly fond of the truth, and, well, you know what? Well, this time, it's really not any different. Yes, sadly, that is right. This fiscal reform isn't the largest in US history, indeed not at all. In fact, it's not even among the top 5. Well, allow me to explain. Even though we can say that Americans are facing the biggest tax system reform in 30 years, because this law does change a lot of things, the truth is that when it comes to lowering taxes, it's really not that impressive. The general estimate is that this reform will lower taxes between 0.7 and 0.9% of the GDP over the next 10 years. That is approximately $1.5 trillion. Well, the fact is, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, an independent think tank, and also according to the US Treasury, this is actually the 8th largest tax reduction since 1918. Indeed, it is 3 times smaller than Reagan's. Yes, indeed, the problem here may actually be that Donald Trump is simply allergic to the truth. But anyways, what are the main points of this tax reduction, and what are its benefits? Well, let's dive into those right now.
The reform's highlights.
Dear viewer, even though there are a lot of changes, there are really only 2 main points to consider here. One is lowering income tax, that is to say the tax that affects natural persons, just regular man on the street, and the other is the changes to corporate taxes. In the first case for natural persons, this reduction is really small. See, 80% of taxpayers will see an income tax change of less than 2%, and most won't even really notice it. And regarding this matter, Trump has blatantly broken his word. So why is this? Well, because Donald Trump promised a new tax system, a much simpler one with only 3 or 4 brackets and much lower rates.
We're going to cut the individual rates from 7 brackets to 4.
In the end, things have virtually remained the same, with 7 brackets and rates slightly lower than before. And that's not all. This reduction is also temporary. Yeah, that's right. This is going to disappear in 2025 unless Congress changes what it has approved. By the way, one very interesting thing about this law is that it limits deductions for state and local taxes. That is, it punishes states with higher taxes and encourages them to lower them. Now, on the other hand, we have the reduction of corporate income tax, which is, so to speak, the jewel of the reform. Here, the tax decreases from 35% to 21% and changes its scope so that it ceases to be global and affects almost exclusively the United States. Allow me to explain myself, because this is really important here. Until now, when American multinationals such as Apple or Google made money abroad, as for example they do in Ireland, despite having already paid taxes to the Irish government, they had to pay again in the US for what they had earned in Ireland if they wanted to bring the money into the United States. Essentially, they were paying twice for any money they were bringing home. Now, of course, these companies weren't really very willing to do that, so you could probably guess what happened next. Well, these companies, they simply didn't repatriate their income to the United States, and they kept it in financial centers like Luxembourg, Ireland, or Singapore. And the figures, they're pretty dizzying. We're talking about more than $2.5 trillion here. Well, the fact is that from now on, thanks to this reform, US multinationals will only pay the US Treasury for income they make within the country. And for the money that's already outside, the new law states that they can bring it home under very attractive conditions.
As an example, I have millions of dollars overseas. I can't bring it back into this country.
So indeed, it's highly likely that this year we're going to begin to see large amounts of money moving towards the United States. By the way, as a side note, even though the corporate income tax decreased from 35% to 21%, that isn't actually that big of a drop. On the one hand, while the tax rates do decrease, some deductions are eliminated or limited, and those deductions previously allowed companies to pay an average of 22% before the reform. On the other hand, though the old US income tax was the highest in the OECD, if we take into account all the taxes companies paid, not only on income, the truth is that although the United States pays a lot of taxes, Europe's are usually even higher. For example, the ones in Spain, France, or even Germany. But even so, even if it isn't as impressive as the Republican state, it will have positive consequences for the US economy. From now on, the country will be more attractive to investors, its companies will earn more money, and a lot of income that was previously retained abroad will begin to move to the United States. So, due to all of this, and due to some other smaller changes, just this once and certainly without setting a precedent, here at VisualPolitik we can say Trump seems to be doing well in terms of taxes. But if you think that's it, you are very, very wrong. The reform also certainly has its negative points.
The shadows.
Those who follow this channel know that we usually say that things aren't always as pretty as they seem. Well, that is precisely the case with this tax reform law. On the one hand, the positive effects of this law will most likely be much more limited than the Republican Party claims. And why is this? Well, allow me to explain. The US economy is growing at a good pace. There is almost full employment and corporate profits are historically high. That is to say, right now, American companies, which are already very competitive, mostly need fewer regulations, the ability to trade freely, and the freedom to hire the workers they need, including the best talent they can get from abroad. And as you probably know, Trump doesn't exactly play that way. So yeah, the reform will have positive effects, but not as many as some people do think.
While it is not the largest tax cut ever, it is the most poorly timed tax cut in history. The economy is near full employment, and the national debt is at a post-war record and rising fast. Leonard E. Berman, Tax Policy Center co-founder and Institute Fellow at the Urban Institute.
On the other hand, this government isn't talking about reducing public spending. Indeed, on the contrary, they want to increase public spending on infrastructure and the military. And of course, with fewer taxes, this means more deficit and more public debt. And, well, if we're honest, the US has quite a track record of that. And lastly, dear viewer, the forgotten party in this reform is of course the middle class. That's right, the ones who will benefit the most from this reform will be the wealthiest classes, including, of course, Donald Trump himself.
In the center of the stage tonight, businessman Donald Trump.
Am I allowed to accept tips?
I've had rich friends of mine come up to me and say, Donald, you're doing this tax plan. We don't want anything. We don't.
Did the president consider that he and his companies would benefit so well from this reform? Well, I'm going to leave that for you to consider.
The Republican Party has betrayed working families. This tax scam takes billions of dollars away from the middle class and hands it over to Republican donors and wealthy corporations while mortgaging away the future of our economy by adding $1.5 trillion in debt. Tom Perez, chairman of the Democratic National Committee.
Maybe this is why polls state that most Americans do not really like this change. The general perception seems to be that this reform was made by and for the richest. In fact, unlike what we might expect, many Democratic Party leaders are rubbing their hands together and thinking that this may favor them in the midterm elections, which will be held in November. Only time is going to tell. But what we think is that this reform will make US companies more attractive, and that, in principle, is a very good thing. Of course, as things are, the US needs many more measures, which Trump has ruled out. But on the other hand, it may be time for the United States Congress to begin taking their public debt's terrifying growth much more seriously. And by the way, just as a final note here, with this reform, we all kind of win in a way. You see, if the United States reduces its taxes, it's also been shown historically that other governments will be unwilling to raise theirs. But for now, it's your turn. Are you in favor of this tax reform? Well, please let us know in the comments below, as well as in this survey. And as always, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Brand new videos every Monday and Thursday. Also, please don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And as always, thank you for watching.
As an example, I have millions of dollars overseas. I can't bring it back into this country.
Am I allowed to accept tips?
I've had rich friends of mine come up to me and say, Donald, you're doing this tax plan. We don't want anything. We don't.